RBA Day and the Aussie Housing Immigration Ponzi Scheme. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Insights brought to you by Ainslie Bullion and the Gold and Silver Standard. Today, you welcome back Alex, who's been waiting in anticipation to see what the RBA does next, as we're recording this just before the latest decision is released this afternoon. But more importantly, has been back looking at the Aussie housing market and the issues arising there, particularly against the backdrop of currently unsustainable immigration. How are you going today, Alex?
I'm going well. I thought I'd bring it back to Australia today. We've been doing a lot on the US, but Australia is not necessarily in better shape.
No, and it's always good to talk broadly because we do need to sort of watch what's going on overseas. But yeah, it is great to get back to our roots here in Australia, and I know the audience loves that as well, to sort of get more of a local perspective on things. With that in mind, let's start off with the topic that's sort of top of mind at the moment, which is the rate decision. Now, obviously, by the time people see this, the decision will be out, but it's kind of not really relevant from our perspective of what we probably think. So can you maybe tell us what your thoughts are of what they are likely to do today, and more importantly, what your thoughts are on what they should do today?
So I would definitively say they're not going to raise interest rates today. But I definitively say that that's a mistake. I don't want interest rates to rise. I've got a mortgage, but the problem is our Aussie dollar is now falling on the back of the US because we're not keeping up. Our inflation's still at 4.9%. The US is now at 3.3, so there's a widening gap there. And if we don't lift interest rates today, we're at 4.1. The US is around 4.5, I think. If we don't lift to catch up, our dollar will keep dropping and our inflation keeps going up. So we're going to create problems if we don't get on top of this.
Yeah, because it is that differential, and something that I suppose not everyone's thinking about, but often things like currencies are related to the differential between the rates that you've got happening around the world, because money's going to flow to where, or that's the argument at least, money flows to where it's going to get the best return or where it's treated the best. And if we fall behind there's going to be consistent pressure, eventually, maybe not today, but eventually to do something about it to catch up.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of strain, I know, in the economy right now. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But I understand why they're not doing it, but it's going to cause us more problem if they don't. And we're about to talk about the GDP per capita recession, and potentially it makes it worse if our inflation goes higher faster. So, we've got to get a cap on it.
A tricky needle to thread. And you did introduce that topic today, or that concept, which is something I hadn't really heard referred to in that way, which is this idea of per capita recession. So I think from how you've explained it in the article today, I think that's actually a better way to look at the data currently. Can you maybe explain what you specifically mean by that term and where we sit in terms of that at the moment?
Yeah, so I've simplified it as best as I sort of can for today in the article, which is taking our current inflation, or CPI, is at 4.9%. But for example, our non-discretionary spending, so that's the stuff you need to have, well, that's only up 1.7%. So in very simple terms, if you take 1.7 away from 4.9%, people just on non-discretionary, so that's food, shelter, that's actually dropping. So that we've spent 3.2% less on that this year. Whereas if you actually look at the inflation data, housing's up 7.3%. So people are really starting to forgo on things like food, in a pretty significant way. And if you think about that, we're not in a recession because we do keep having positive numbers, but every single person overall is consuming around 3.2% left just in discretion and non-discretionary. In discretionary, which is your holidays, and things you don't need, it's actually down at over 8%. So people are really starting to give things up. You talk to everyone at the moment, everyone's feeling like we're in a recession, but all the numbers are saying something different. So the pressure's on, and the reason this is going on is our migration is just crazy high. So, 500,000 people. I read an article, it's around 1,361 people a day at the moment that are arriving in Australia and we have to find houses, we have to find hospitals, we have to find things to service these people, and we just quite frankly are not keeping up. And there's that 30,000 people public housing that they're trying to get through in the Senate at the moment. They can't even get that through. So where are they going to house 500,000 people if they cannot build 30,000 public houses?
There's heaps there in what you've just said, actually, and I'd like to dig into a few of those more specifically, because lots of really good points you just raised. Firstly, when you're talking about this idea of the number, like the numbers just don't add up when you are looking at the economy overall and saying, well, everything's going okay, but when you dug into those specific areas like the discretionary spending, like that's what matters to people. So it's, they're probably better numbers to use than a lot of what you see reported. That was the first point I thought was really useful. But can you maybe dig specifically into this linked immigration? Because it's one that, like, it often ends up being controversial, but I think you're not really looking at it from an angle of controversy at all. You're really just looking at raw numbers. So can you maybe just dig a little bit deeper into why there is a link here to immigration specifically?
So all the other numbers are big and positive, right? So, our CPI is at 4.9%, but our population is growing so quickly that population is taking away from, or adding to the CPI, I guess, and taking goods and services away from other people, or it's being dispersed more. So when you're dropping in, so when your discretionary spending is dropping 3.3, is it that right? 3.3% discretionary drops, but your CPI is up 4.9%. It means the bigger population is consuming 4.9% more, but the smaller individual is consuming 3.3% less. So it's an enormous change that migration changes the numbers and changes what is a recession just in numbers to what is a recession to you as an individual.
Yep, I think that makes sense. So a number of elements would contribute to that, I suppose, because you're talking about, for example, the wages that you actually receive if you across the economy. Is that the angle you're coming from?
Yeah. So I think you and I were talking about this before, so that's a good point. So what we were talking about before was, all these people that are coming in for jobs. So in July, immigration numbers went up to 3.8% from a low of 3.5%. But if our population is growing at, 5%, these people, so let me go to the US this time. So non-farm payroll came out on Friday.
Yep.
1.2 million full-time jobs were lost. 670,000 full-time jobs were lost, and they were replaced with part-time jobs. So the overall number in the US was 187,000 jobs, but they're paying less. So wage growth is stalling everywhere. So people are starting to be paid less. So let's say in Australia, you're now a company, and as a company, you just want to grow how much you produce, and that to you feels good. So companies right now are still growing, but those goods that they're producing are being spread among a lot more people. So, and those people are now earning less because they're now fighting for more jobs. Yep. So you've got this huge advantage to companies and a huge disadvantage to individuals. And ultimately that just creates a bigger wealth gap. So, this whole disparity of the two-speed economy and baby boomers still spending and having beautiful holidays, but families doing it tough because their mortgages are going up and their housing, which in the CPI this month was 7.3%. So they're doing it tougher, whereas baby boomers are doing, and this wealth gap is just growing.
And we know that is what fuels so much unrest in societies. We're seeing that across the world. And even it will increasingly become a problem here.
Yeah, it's not just Australia that's pumping immigration. The US is, with documented or undocumented immigrants. New Zealand is, Canada is. And if you read about their economies right now, New Zealand is in a recession now, whereas the other ones, they again talk about GDP per capita recessions. It's not about, a number that says recession. It's about you as an individual feeling that
Actually,
it's a recession.
yes, yeah. And that's why it's so powerful to look at it through that lens, because that makes more sense than the headline numbers that don't necessarily align with what people are actually experiencing on the ground, I suppose. Can I just dig into another area that specifically you were talking about with housing? This I found really interesting. So how many houses do we actually need? And how does this line up with what we're on track to produce? Because part of your argument here is that a lot of this is felt in the housing market, which is absolutely the case. I mean, I think we all know that intuitively from what we've experienced or heard other people experience recently. So can you give us some specifics around that? Because I found that really interesting.
So as far as the housing market in Australia goes, right now the government said we need 240,000 houses a year to house our 500,000 a year immigrants, which sounds about right.
Yep.
To be honest, that seems like a near to impossible target. The peak building rate was in 2017, where we produced 225,000 houses, which we had approved in 2015. So there was a pipeline of construction coming through. So that's the peak that we've ever produced. Well, right now we've just approved 140,000 dwellings. So next year we're going to miss no matter what.
Yep.
And that's based on 240,000 dwellings, which would have been near impossible because it's never been achieved in Australia. But the fact that we don't have the pipeline just pushes the pressure further down. So next year we might miss by 100,000 dwellings. Well, how are the next 4 years going to catch up with an extra 25,000? It's like 20% more than what we've ever built year on year. And so we just don't have the labor, the skills, the pipeline to house these people. So something is going to have to give. And it doesn't look like it's going to be the supply side. It's dropping. People are nervous about property prices. People are nervous about a recession that they're feeling that isn't being talked about. And so they're not producing. So the government's leaving this up to private companies and individuals to fill the pipeline, but the pipeline's not there. So the only answer is either going to be, greater homelessness, or we're going to have to stop this huge migration push that's going on.
Such a valid point about the lags. And I think that's what's missed in the conversation, is just how long this takes. And I know anecdotally from people that I've spoken to, particularly off the plan, or building a house or off the plan, any of those things, that people were expecting to be moving in 12 months ago. But that's the backlog that exists in a whole range of different areas for a whole range of different reasons, whether it's, sometimes it's the weather. There's a lot of things that can slow things down. So to talk about the numbers that you were mentioning being not there in the pipeline makes perfect sense, right? Because even if we decide today, yes, we want to build all these houses, it takes a long time to get to that level.
Okay.
And if we've had a slowdown from the top because people are worried about interest rates or for whatever reason, we're not getting there overnight, that's for sure.
Well, just think about the building bankruptcies that we've had.
Yes. Yep.
Company after company falling down because prices and raw materials have gone up because of inflation. So they're falling. And, because if our CPI is at 4.9%, companies in Australia, manufacturers, a lot of building materials manufactured here, they don't necessarily have capacity that just builds overnight.
No.
It had, like a plastic machine, if we were to order one, takes about 18 months to get here. It's not tomorrow. And then you've got to build the molds, test everything. So, it's probably a 24 to 30 month time frame to get a new product online and a new manufacturing line. So if we've never had it before, there's not the capacity right now in the economy.
And particularly right now, and I really reiterate that point around the collapses that we've seen, because what we have to remember is that, of course, that will come back eventually. We'll have these new companies that replace the old, and we end up with more builders and building companies, or these mega companies existing. But that's certainly not overnight. And a lot of those, what we also have to remember is a lot of that expertise moves on, because they might go, well, okay, I lost my job there. They might be absorbed somewhere else, but a lot of these other companies don't have the capacity necessarily to absorb these extra people straight away. So that takes time. Some people retrain and go, okay, well, I'll leave that industry now and go do something else. Like it's very complicated. So yeah, it's certainly not click the fingers. I think the last question I'd like to sort of wrap it up on, which is along that line of thought, is that infrastructure isn't just houses. So like further down that chain, it also presents an issue for the supporting infrastructure we need when you have large numbers of people to add to the system. So
Yeah.
is this why you're referring to it as effectively a Ponzi scheme? I mean, I know that's sort of a bit of a sensationalist heading, but is that where that term is coming from here?
Well, I mean, you can read every article in the newspapers over the last week. They're all talking about how, great, we've got new paramedics, but they're waiting at hospitals because there's no beds.
Yes.
So we're just not building hospitals, roads, toll roads in Sydney. My husband was complaining today that he's on a toll road, 2-lane toll road in Sydney, that who knows why they built it 2 lanes in the first place. But he's paying, $15 to be on a road that is traveling at, 40 kilometers an hour.
Yep.
So what's the point? So all of the infrastructure right now is insane. We have a GDP per capita recession, and something is going to have to give. And for all the reasons that hospitals, roads, and construction cannot keep up, what will drop is migration. And when that happens, that's when we're going to feel the really big recession, because it will catch up, because we just can't keep adding people.
Alex, as always, great insight and really interesting topic that I don't think, well, I'm certainly not hearing a lot of other people talk about through that lens. So really appreciate that. Thank you for that work today.
Oh, you're welcome. Nice. Thanks for having me again.
It's always interesting. So, and I know our audience appreciates it. There's a lot of people who really mention to me or comment online about really appreciating your work there. So yeah, keep that up. We love it.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks everyone for watching. Remember, reach out with any questions or comments on the social platforms. I'm going to actually attempt to respond to some of those potentially with little video clips. So we'll see if that works. It's just a bit of an experiment or an idea of an experiment at the moment. If you have a specific question, so particularly if I could pull up a chart or something to help explain it, the simpler the better. So you don't stress my brain out too much, but we'll give that a little go. So if you have a question, feel free to put that up there and I'll try and have a go at recording a bit of an answer to that. That's us for today. We'll be back tomorrow with Branko, I think, at this stage, to discuss all things markets and metals. But until then, have a great rest of the day.